Hey.
You are on air.
All right. We will be starting here in just a few minutes. We're waiting for more people to get on the call, but we're going to do a live teletown hall from Washington, D.C. This is Congressman Morgan Griffith. So bear with us while we wait for a few more folks to get on the conference. Do appreciate you all being patient, and I'll keep repeating this because more and more people are joining, so they need to hear that we're waiting to get a few more people on the conference call. The way this works is the computer calls. They set all that up, and then folks decide if they want to join. And we'll call thousands of households this evening. We'll have a fair number that join us, but we do like to at least get some of those calls made before we start the actual town hall. But you will be given an opportunity to ask questions, and the way you do that is you press 0, and it'll put you into the lineup to be able to ask a question. And we do try to get around as many parts of the area that we're calling on a particular night. We don't call the whole district, but we do call 3 or 4 counties at one time, and so we'll try to make sure that every area gets a call in or a question in while we're doing this town hall. We do appreciate all of you joining us on this teletown hall. We have enough people now to at least get started, and I do appreciate you all joining us this evening. I am Congressman Morgan Griffith, and I am in Washington this week. We are taking votes. The House of Representatives is in session, and we are voting, and I am in my office at the Capitol, and I appreciate you taking your time to join me, which the area that we're calling tonight, most folks, according to the radar, have pretty good weather this evening, so I appreciate you taking your time to be on the call with us. And I look forward to addressing many of the issues that you want to ask me about that are facing the nation for any questions you have. As I said, for those who were on earlier, if you would like to ask a question, please press 0, and that will put you in the lineup to be able to ask a question. I will probably have to repeat some of this because we already are getting more and more people on the call, and they may not have heard this. So if you want to ask a question in this live teletown hall from Washington, I'm Congressman Morgan Griffith, press 0. Now, in order to get the most questions answered during this telephone town hall, what I would ask is that you ask your question. I'll give a response. Then there'll be one additional question if you'd like to do a follow-up. I don't want to cut folks off, but we do try to get to as many people as we can. If you're joining us for this call and you have not yet signed up for our email updates from the office, you can do so, www.morgangriffith.house.gov. Again, if you're joining us, this is a live teletown hall meeting from Washington. I'm Congressman Morgan Griffith, and if you want to get in the lineup to ask a question, please press 0. Now, I will tell you that one of the things that sometimes happens is that people will ask a question specific to them or to a family member related to Social Security, Medicare, Department of Veterans Affairs, etc. I'm happy to answer philosophical questions, and will do the best I can on a specific question, but normally we have folks at our offices that work on those problems and try to solve those issues. The Christiansburg office, their phone number is 540-381-5671. Again, the Christiansburg office, if you have a specific problem, not a philosophical matter or general question, but specifically for you, it's probably better to call the office in Christiansburg tomorrow, and that number is 540-381-5671. That being said, let's get started with questions. If you want to ask a question, press 0, and we will start with Glenna, the Garlic household in Pulaski, Virginia. Sorry about that.
How you doing, Mr. Griffin?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. There's a lot of things that needs to be put back into the people's hands in this country. The government is trying to run the people.
Yes, sir.
And what I mean by this, their rights has gone out the window. Everything in this country is money, money, money. Taxpayers is having to pay more and more taxes, and they're taking more and more away from them. And the government needs to do something about this. We can't support the world. We're letting all kinds of people come into this country, and we're trying to support them and forgetting about our people here.
Yes, no, you're right. We need to make sure that we're using our resources wisely. We don't want to, mistreat other people, but we also have to recognize that we can't afford to do everything that we might want to do for all the people of the world. So I have to appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Did you have another question this evening?
Yes, sir. It's a lot of things in this country that has to do with morals too. And I don't want to down anybody or anything, but I cannot see how a president and a vice president in this country can put things out to people in this world that's against our morals and against our religion, and it states in the Bible that things is wrong. I can't see this. It's wrong. They know it's wrong. So why are they doing it? That's perceiving to the people in this country and the children and the teenagers in this country that all this stuff is right, and it's wrong. I mean, it's no question it's wrong. And I'm not going to state what it is specifically, but
yes, sir.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, sir. And I would tend to agree with you if I'm following your drift correctly. I would tend to agree with you, and it is troubling. I will also tell you that it's troubling that around the world Christians do seem to be under a pretty heavy attack. And had a young lady in my office a few weeks back from Nigeria who's lost several members of her family, and the State Department won't recognize that it's a Muslim versus Christian war, but in northern Nigeria, that group that's kidnapping girls and doing all that kind of stuff, they're only attacking the Christian community. They're not attacking everybody, just the Christians, or primarily the Christians. And that is really a religious war over there. And sometimes you have to just state the facts. But anyway,
yes,
I will keep an eye on it and do what I can. And I appreciate your call this evening, and thank you for listening.
Yes, sir, and appreciate your time, Mr. Griffin.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much. I do appreciate the time that each and every one of you is taking this evening to be on this call. For those of you who've joined us recently, we are doing a live teletown hall. I am Congressman Morgan Griffith, and if you would like to get in the lineup to ask a question, feel free and press 0, and that'll get you in there. We're going to go to the Foley household in Patrick Springs. Foley household in Patrick Springs. What we try to do is move around while we're doing this so that we try to get the regions that are in. I do about 3 or 4 counties when I do these, and we're trying to make sure that every region gets at least one question in during this hour-long teletown hall. Do we have somebody at the Foley household in Patrick Springs?
Yes, sir. This is Ronnie Foley, James Ronnie.
Yes, sir.
And I had you help me out on my VA, which I appreciate a whole lot, on my benefits that I was due, and it took 38 years to get them, but you come through for me, and I sure do appreciate it. But it seems like you have trouble anymore, chronic pain is not service-connected, and it seems like they don't want to give pain medications on time, it keep you hanging and keep your nerves tore up, and you don't know from one month to the next if they're going to cut you off, or I don't sell no pills, I just do them because I need them, it's the only way
yes,
I can
sir.
make it through life, but I just think, maybe something needs to be addressed on that part.
Well, we're trying to work with the drug enforcement folks and the Food and Drug Administration, because in an effort, and this time I'm not going to be critical of what they're trying to do, they're trying to crack down on the abuse of prescription pain medications, and they absolutely ought to. But sometimes that means they go too far. and they've made it hard. I've had other situations where they've made it hard for people who really did need the pain medication to get a hold of it. So I've had some conversations with them about that, and hopefully we're working on some new, they're going to work on some new parameters to try to make sure that the folks who do need it can get their prescriptions for the pain meds. And one of the problems that we found with the pharmacies is that in the more rural areas, and of course most of the time they're used to dealing with D.C. or New York City or someplace like that, and so they worry that, somebody may go into a pharmacy and get too much. Well, what they're doing is they're having the drug companies limit how much they send. And in the big city, you might have 3 or 4 drug companies sending the meds to the various pharmacies. In the rural area, you're more likely to have your pharmacist dealing with one manufacturer, one warehouse, middleman, and that means it makes it harder.
Yeah,
yes,
it
sir.
seems to me like it's a lot of people, that they get prescriptions and 90% of them on some kind of social help, like mine's service connected. I'm a Vietnam era veteran. I joined in 74 and with all intentions of going to Vietnam, like I said, and now I've got post-stress disorder, and which they treat me for that, but I hurt my back in a trucking accident here about 10 years ago, which I'd rather be out working, but my physical ability is just not going to let me do it. And
yes,
I just want to, see if we can get off of that bad boy list. My past is my past, but I'll give up my old ways when I turned 50 and been trying to live straight and narrow, and kind of let the Lord guide me through my life, and it helps more than anything. But they'll tell you, well, your pain medication didn't show up. I can go up here at Walmart and get a test, and it shows up on theirs, So it's like you're telling me, like you're lying to us, you're getting rid of it. And I think, that the DEA has something to do with that.
Well, the DEA does, and they're just trying to do their job, make sure that we don't have a lot of problems with prescription painkillers, but it does sometimes make it more difficult for people who really need it. But I do appreciate it, and I hope you have a good evening, and thank you for being on our Teletown Hall this evening.
Well, I sure appreciate what you helped me with, and maybe we get this other stuff straightened out. And you have a good evening. It's nice talking to you, and I really do thank you.
Well, you're most welcome. I'd like to thank all my folks who, thank you, sir. I'd like to thank all my folks who work with me on this. Obviously, that gentleman was helped by our Constituent Service Division, and what they do is they try to help folks with problems. He indicated that we were able to help them. Obviously, I'm in D.C. reading bills and voting on things, and I can't always know everything that's going on, but they did a nice job for him, and I'm very pleased. And if you have a specific problem on Social Security or Medicare or something involving the Department of Veterans Affairs, don't hesitate to call our office. The Christiansburg office number is 540-381-5671. This is a live Teletown Hall for those of you who may have joined us a little bit later than some of the others. We're glad to have you on this evening. If you'd like to get into the lineup to ask a question, you just have to press 0, and that'll put you in the lineup, and we'll try to get to you. We don't get to all the calls, but we get to a bunch of them, and look forward to answering your questions this evening. Let's go. I want to go to the Lockhart household. Let's see. There you go, in Fancy Gap. And I've got some of my team here helping me, so they have to push the button.
Right, all right.
How are you?
I'm just fine, brother. And you sound like just a wonderful guy. I'm very pleased to listen to you. I was almost hung up when they called. But anyway, will you sponsor a bill to outlaw liberalism?
Well, I can't say that I will, because I do believe in free speech. But,
yeah, there you go. Well, I wish it applied to conservatives anyway, whatever. But one thing that I'm concerned about is, of course, the Mexico situation, because I lived in Arizona for a long time. And I'm very concerned about our Marine that's down there.
Yes, sir.
If anything you can do to get him out of that mess, cut off foreign aid to Mexico, okay?
Well, we're certainly looking at it, and I don't know what we can do. We may be able to see an amendment on that.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't
No.
sound like an idiot, but No, I really appreciate you doing this, and thank you for your people calling me. And I know you're up against just a horrible thing, and do the best you can, brother, okay?
I will. Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate
Thank
it. You have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for being on the call this evening.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, let's go to the Sykes household in Galax.
Yes, sir. Thank you
Yes,
for
sir.
taking my call. I've been anxious to listen to some town hall meetings that you had over the phone. And my name is Ronnie Sykes, and I, back some years ago, served 2 terms on the Board of Supervisors for Grayson County. And just suggestions, and you know better than I do, but this country, we outsourcing so many things that, I feel like that if we started telling the people that we're importing from that we're going to bring 10% a year of all imports back and manufacturing back to the communities, that, we get this thing in line where we'd be recouping more taxes and things. And you could tell the people from foreign countries that we're going to do this, and they'd prep themselves for it. But our country is more important than they are, although we want their, position for us manufacturing certain things. And
right.
Then if we rebuilt the communities, and I heard Willie Nelson say this other night about rebuilding the railroads, and that would save on fuel as far as all this trucking and things, and I agree with that. And then control the borders, which the gentleman just before me pointed out, and I really think things would come back in place if we, did some of these things, and I'd like,
yes, sir.
You to expound upon that if you don't mind.
All right, be happy to. One, I agree with you. We've got to control the borders. And I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have the ability to pull up the exact quote, but Ronald Reagan said a country that can't protect its own borders is not a country at all. And right now we have children who are crossing our borders. They may be getting some assistance to get from Central America up to the border, but they're crossing the border on their own. And, we can't, you hate to see kids not get the help they need. On the other side, we can't take in 100,000 or more children, every 6 months. I mean, this is getting absurd, and so we need to protect our borders. I agree with that completely. In regard to manufacturing, we're never going to be able to compete with some of the Asian countries, China, Malaysia, the list goes on wages. We don't want to. We want better wages. But we can compete because the American worker is still the most efficient worker in the world, and we can compete because we are number one in the world in energy resources. However, this administration, currently in control of the White House and all the regulatory agencies, doesn't want us to be able to use North American energy. So we've got children that can cross our border, but they won't allow the Canadians to ship oil down here, which we would then refine and make money off of. And when you have cheaper energy prices, whether it be oil or natural gas or coal, that makes it easier to manufacture all kinds of goods. And, people don't always understand that oil, natural gas, and coal also make up a huge part of the products that we make. You make different types of plastic from each one of those. It is, we are the best place in the world right now to make various kinds of plastic because we have the cheapest resources to do it with. The problem is, with the regulations that we're seeing coming out of this administration, companies are a little bit hesitant to build a factory, put a lot of money into it, only to find out that, 2 or 3 years after they've put in a 30-year investment, the EPA says you can't do that anymore. And they certainly don't have that problem in Brazil. They don't have that problem in Asia. And unfortunately, what happens is a lot of companies are making a decision that instead of building a new facility in the United States or bringing their facilities here, they'll just find some other place to do it. Now, that's not to say it's all bleak. We have picked up some chemical companies from Germany because of energy prices being lower here with natural gas. And there are places we can win, but we could be doing even more if this administration would adopt reasonable regulations. I'm not saying no regulations, but adopt reasonable regulations. We could, once again, capture a larger share of the marketplace with manufactured goods. And instead, they seem to think that, it doesn't matter, and we just send those jobs somewhere else. Well, there are a lot of people in the 9th District of Virginia would love to have those jobs, and I'm going to fight every day that I'm up here to try to get those jobs back for us in manufacturing, et cetera, so we can have those jobs. I think that covered at least a couple of the things you raised.
Yes, sir. In our county here, we've seen some things in the past that kind of deterred use of our resources, and that is, I think, if Congress and the Senate saw such a need for power,
yes, sir.
The New River, they ought to go ahead and build those dams, and the Congress can mandate that, even if it is designated a wild and scenic river, and because it's the cheapest source of power to build power plants on streams, and I just really think that that'd benefit this area, plus supply power to other parts of the country.
Well, and interestingly, we did pass a bill. Now, a lot of our bills pass the House and go over to the Senate, and I don't know what happened to this one. I can't tell you tonight that it died in the Senate or that it passed, but I don't remember it ever becoming law, so it must have gone over to the Senate and died. But we passed a bill in the House that would allow more hydroelectric power plants, but it wasn't the giant ones, the great big ones, like they already have on the New River, which created Claytor Lake, but smaller ones that wouldn't have as big an impact on fish species and so forth, but would allow you to generate power for a particular area. And, we could certainly do that on a number of the rivers and streams in Southwest Virginia. And I thought that was a pretty good bill because it was kind of a compromise. It wasn't saying let's build giant dams and flood everything, but it, take advantage of the natural flowing of the water and reap electrical benefits off of that. It is an affordable way to do it. There's new technology out there that would make it even cheaper. And then all of a sudden you've got, electricity for places and cheap power for places that need jobs, like Grayson County, like Carroll County, and we've got, of course, Radford, Pulaski on the phone, and Patrick on the phone tonight as well. So, all of those areas have supplies of water that could be used, particularly when you're talking about new technology and smaller facilities, so you aren't flooding a bunch of the land in the process.
Okay. Well, thank you for
thank you.
that to me.
And anytime you have a question, just call my office and let them know that you have a question, and we'll try to get back to you.
But I do think the reasoning behind our bringing our jobs back is to do it, at 10% a year and tell them to do that, because people in this country are willing to pay more for things that are manufactured here.
Right.
I think. And,
yes, sir.
And rather than have to look on something that's got China on it every time you look at it, or Mexico.
Yes, sir.
So
amen.
That's just honest, okay?
Absolutely. No, I'm with you.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Do appreciate you all being on the call. We'll now go to the Brown household in Hillsville.
Hello, Mr. Griffith. Thank you for taking my call.
Absolutely. How are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
This isn't what I wanted to talk about, but I did want to make a quick comment on
Sure.
what we were just discussing. I think the government gives companies in this country no incentive to stay in America. They get bigger tax breaks by going overseas. So if we gave them more incentive to stay here, we would have our jobs here. Do you agree or disagree?
No, that's certainly part of the component. We didn't get into that with the last question, but the United States has the highest corporate income tax in the world. And if a company is successful and they have, they go overseas and they sell cars, for example, if they want to bring that money back and invest it in the United States, we tax them again. Most countries don't do that. What they do is that if you make it in another country, they're fine with that because they know that means there's more executive jobs and more high-paying jobs in research and development in their country. And if you want to bring that money home, they're more happy than anything to get that money coming back into their economy. Instead, we punish companies for becoming world competitors, and we tell them don't bring that money home or we'll tax you for it. Well, that's just it's a sad policy because it really does. It discourages investment in the United States.
Exactly. I agree with that. But one thing I wanted to talk about was I don't understand why the Republicans are letting this administration get away with everything that they're doing. Obama's just doing his own policies, his own laws. He's not following what the law says. He's just doing whatever he wants, and we roll over and play dead. I don't get it. I really just do not get it. Why we don't stand up and make a stand. Then my second part to that is also there's a lot of infighting with the Republicans for the Tea Party and what they might call mainstream or the establishment. And we need to stand together and be united. You know, the Democrats do it. And I know there's more liberal and there's a little more conservative, middle-of-the-road Democrats, but they stand together behind an issue. We don't do that. We fight amongst ourselves. We don't stand up, and we don't stand up to Obama. We let him just do whatever he wants and walk all over us because we're afraid we might offend somebody. We need to get a backbone and stand up for what we believe is right. Government needs to step down. People need to step up.
And I agree with that. And it was interesting because this weekend, George Will wrote a column and said that there was a way that Congress could actually sue the administration for basically doing Congress's job. And the Speaker sent the column out to all the members of the House, and I sent it back and said, okay, let's do it. It's time to fight. And I agree with you. I've also signed on to several what we call amicus briefs. Those are friend of the court, means that I'm not, we're not parties, but we think that the people who sued were right. And I just signed on to one of those that was filed last week in regard to EPA regulations related to the Chesapeake Bay, where they're, I think, overstepping the law. I was in a fight last week with, and I say a fight, it was a verbal exchange in committee with the EPA's administrator, basically over air, and said, you don't have the authority for these new regulations under the law. So I'm going to probably do a brief of my own on that case when it is appropriate. It'll probably be another 6 to 8 months before the court cases are ready, maybe even longer than that. But when it is time, I will file a brief on that because I've studied the law, and they do not have authority. There's also a lot of folks who are looking at the Obamacare facts that the president has changed at least a dozen different things that were spelled out in the code. And interestingly, this week there was an opinion that didn't relate to Obamacare, but it did relate to regulations and authority. And in regard to the EPA, while the EPA won most things, the Supreme Court said while the agencies can interpret what Congress has done, they cannot do those things which Congress has specifically said don't do, or they can't not do those things Congress has specifically said that they were supposed to do. And that's interesting because that's exactly what the president has done in Obamacare. And I was reading an opinion earlier today that said that may be a signal that the Supreme Court is ready to get some of these opinions on Obamacare and tell the agencies they didn't have the authority to change it. And that will really take the fight back to the president. And there are other things that we can do, but I can't discuss those because this is technically a governmental call, and I'm not supposed to get into politics. So, but there are other things that can be done. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you fighting for us and standing up. I did hear that Speaker Boehner tonight is deciding on whether he was going to actually sue the president or not on an issue. So I appreciate it.
Well, I have told him to do it. And whether he does it or not is another story. But I sent him a message that said, do it. Time to fight.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Do appreciate it. Do appreciate everybody being on the call. We're about not quite halfway through, so we've still got time to get a lot of calls in. And we will go to the Conley household in Hillsville.
Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
My question would be why has Congress not made a move to impeach the president? With all of the IRS, the VA, Benghazi, everything he has done outside the law, outside of the Constitution, why hasn't Congress made a move?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't have an easy answer for you. There are a lot of different parts to it. There's certainly the IRS scandal is extremely serious. Benghazi was a huge cover-up, and clearly I think there were mistakes. But beyond the mistakes that were made, and look, every administration, every human being makes mistakes. The key is like with your kids. Just don't lie about it and say, okay, I made a mistake. And it would be a horrible thing, but, you know, don't lie about it. They clearly fabricated stories. Clearly heads ought to roll. There are a lot of different pieces. Some members of Congress aren't willing to go there yet. There are more and more people who are willing to go after some of his appointees. I participated last night. I say participated. I went in and watched it. It was the best ticket in Washington. And when I'm up here, I try to, you know, read things or study things. And I went to the hearing last night in the Oversight Committee with the IRS chief, and wanted us to believe that the head of the IRS had a 10-year-old computer. If you've listened to what he was saying, oh, our computers are old and they fall apart, that it just by happenstance lost like 18 months of emails, that the hard drive couldn't be fixed. We didn't happen to tell the archivists, the people who were supposed to keep the government records about it, because we didn't think it was important, even though the law required them to tell the archivists if they lost anything. They didn't do that. All of this happened in 2011, and strangely enough, it happened shortly after some of the Congress folks started looking into the targeting of conservative groups by the IRS. And, oh, by the way, they had a backup system, which they then canceled about 2 months after all of this happened with Lois Lerner's computer. I submit to you, and I was talking with Trey Gowdy earlier. He was a prosecutor. I was a defense attorney. I believe a jury in Southwest Virginia would convict somebody of destroying evidence because somebody did something they weren't supposed to. And the circumstantial evidence, you don't have to have, you know, a film of them standing around, you know, conspiring to destroy it. The circumstantial evidence is that the probability of all of those things happening totally by accident is so astronomically high, you don't have to be on one side of the aisle or another to understand that if you make the IRS a political arm of the party in power, whether it be Republicans, as Richard Nixon tried to do, or Democrats, there is going to be a serious problem in this country, and our republic will be in danger. And that, to me, is a very, very serious problem, and there's all kinds of conversations going on about what we should do in that regard. Now, the fact that they took away the computer evidence, however, they would say an accident, it looks very strange to me, means that we don't have a direct link to the White House. And one of the interesting things that came out last night was the White House found out about it, but nobody told them. Nobody will admit who told the White House that Lois Lerner's emails were missing, but the White House, one of the White House lawyers knew about it in April. Congress wasn't told till June. So that's another, you know, piece of evidence that indicates something was going on. Whether or not we can tag the president with it is a whole different story, because as you know, with impeachment, you have to be able to prove that the president did something. And this president, if you believe him, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't know anything, and he didn't know what was going on with Benghazi. He didn't know anything about the IRS scandal. He didn't know anything about the VA. He doesn't know anything about this, that, and the other. It's very frustrating in that regard, but we'll deal with it and try to do the best we can.
Also is here's the IRS, and they're supposed to be taking the money from the taxpayers to afford the Affordable Care Act, and they can't even track emails, let alone track who's supposed to pay what.
Well, that's right. They can't. We've already made overpayments. The taxpayer has made overpayments under Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, because the IRS doesn't really know or can't verify exactly how much money these people really were making or not making. Right. And so, you know, we have a VA that can't keep track of things in the healthcare side. We have an IRS that can't keep track of things. And yet this administration thinks that, notwithstanding all the failures they've had, and we haven't even gotten into foreign policy tonight, that somehow they can take over our entire healthcare system over time and change it dramatically. And they're changing it, but now there are families that are helped, but for the vast majority of middle-class families in the United States, they're going to be hurt by Obamacare. There will be people who are helped. There's no question. Some will win. Some will be helped. And that's great. but the vast majority of us are going to be hurt. Anyway, thank you so much.
I retired from the insurance industry, and I can tell you that the ones that will make out is the insurance companies.
Yeah, they're not going to lose. That's why they supported a lot of them, not all of them, but that's why a lot of them supported Obamacare in the first place. They saw an opportunity to make more money. Yep.
Yeah, that's correct. And thank you so much for taking my call.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, let's go to Stuart and the Jordan household.
Thank you very much for taking my call.
Absolutely. Hope you're well this evening.
I'm doing great. I'm a nurse. I've been nursing for 32 years. I guess
Yes,
I'll
ma'am.
tell my age. But the thing that concerns me now is the mental health, and I will say crisis, that we have in our country. In Virginia, in Patrick County, we have one of the highest suicide rates in the state. And I feel like we need to do more as far as mental health care goes. I think we'd be better served to do things on the front end versus having to pay for it on the back end as far as incarceration and the things that we have to deal with.
I agree with you. What would? But here's the, and we've been working on this. I serve on the health subcommittee, and we've been working on this, particularly in relationship to the young men, and it's usually young men who have onset of mental illness in their late teens and into their up until their late 20s, and who then become violent. And so we've been working on trying to figure out how to do this. But what suggestions would you have specifically? Because there's no question we need to do more. Some have argued that we need to, if you have a tendency towards violence, we need to put more people back into long-term care, which we've gotten away from in this country. Some people are against that. Others think we need to have more family involvement and relax the HIPAA rules. But what would you do?
Well, I think one of the problems is I have a daughter that works in social services, and her frustration is there are a lot of court-ordered mental health evaluations and that sort of thing. And the waiting list, because there are not enough clinicians, psychologists, and people in that field of expertise, the waiting list is anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Well, by that time, you've got an individual whose likelihood of committing a crime or doing some type of harm is going to be great. And another thing is, I think we have to start even before that. We have to start in the schools. I have a friend that I watched her try to get help for her son who's bipolar, and she spent a good part of 10 years going through the red tape, going through all the things she had to go through to try to get him help, and she's still trying to get him help. If he had been under Medicaid, they told him or her that the services would have been there, but because she has private insurance and struggles with no insurance at times, she could get no help for him. And I think that's just a disservice. And I think it's got to start even younger, because I think a lot of times the problems are going to start showing themselves subtly, the school-age kids.
Yeah, particularly what we've been looking at now. Bipolar may show up earlier, but there are a lot of disorders that start showing up in the puberty period in particular.
Right.
Now, we've been focused in on young men in particular because those apparently, according to the data, it's mostly, now the Virginia Tech shooter was Asian, but it's mostly white males that go out and do this between the ages of 14 and 28 is when they have their first onset. And you touched on one of the problems. We don't have enough clinicians. And if you had a problem with your arm, a skin rash, you'd go get it looked at after a week or two. What we find with mental illness a lot of times also is the family wants to think, well, he'll grow out of it or she'll grow out of it. And women have other types of mental illness, but they'll grow out of it, or it's just a phase. And so the data, it seems to indicate it's like 14 months before anybody even in a family will start seeking to get somebody help. And they really need to go get that help sooner. And
Well, that's
I will
true.
be looking at ways, and your idea in regard to Medicaid related to mental health, because it is true, if you're diagnosed, before you're 18, then there are more benefits available to you in regard to the Medicaid system, and we clearly want people to get the help because it does cost us a lot on the back end, as you said.
Yeah, and it makes me sad to see an individual want the help and can't get the help.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a real concern for me, and I appreciate you listening and doing anything you can to. And like I say, I think we need to be able to have more funding as far as clinicians and psychiatrists and psychologists, even in rural. I'm sure it's that way in the cities too, but in a rural setting, it is so hard to get help.
Yeah, in the cities, the problem is they still don't have as many as they would like. But the ones who are there are working very hard. In the rural areas, sometimes it's just hard to have somebody in the community who's close enough for people to feel comfortable they can ride up there and wait an hour if they have to wait to see the doctor. So it is a problem.
Yeah.
I'll be looking at programs. I don't have a quick answer for you, or an easy answer, but I will be looking for ways to solve that. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate it.
All right. You have a nice evening, man.
Thank
you for being on the call. Do appreciate everybody who's on the call. We still have lots of folks and lots of questions, and we're going to go to the Mackey household in Fairlawn. Yes, sir.
Mr. Congressman, I appreciate your taking my call, and I wanted to make two comments.
Yes, sir.
First, I salute your courage in taking a stand for medical marijuana for so many years.
Yes,
at
sir.
a time when it was extremely difficult for you to do so. And I, as I say, I salute your courage in doing this. And secondly, I wanted to comment that I feel like it's a real mistake for the United States to get involved in what's going on in Iraq now. I mean, I just don't think that the position of the United States is to try and solve a problem between Shiites and Sunnis. We've tried to train this army for 10 years at least, and we had a situation in Mosul where 1,000 jihadists ran off, caused a 30,000-man army to run away. And it seems clear to me that our position is not to be sorting things out between Shia and Sunnis. And I was wondering what your opinion on that is.
Well, and it's a tough situation. I will tell you that we had an amendment last week that was offered on a defense budget bill that said that we needed it would end the authorization of use of military force in Iraq. I voted for the amendment. It did not pass, but I voted for the amendment because, and I tried to listen to the debate, and one of the issues on the debate was, look, if we need to do something in Iraq, we don't need to be using a 2002 resolution. We need to, have a congressional resolution that reflects what's happening on the ground today. And I thought that made sense. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned because the whole area is about to be destabilized. And if I had been president, which I have no desire to be, don't want anybody to mistake that I have some desire to be president. I do not. But if I'd been president, I probably would have given the government of Iraq some more of the supplies that they wanted earlier in the year. I would have had to thought about maybe some bombing raids. I'm not sure I would have done that. I'd had to have more intelligence from the ground, which I don't get. The president gets that. He is the commander-in-chief. But it's a bad situation, and I certainly don't want to put more young American lives into jeopardy by going into that bad situation when you're absolutely right. They spent a lot of time training that army, and they folded. And I don't understand it, but it looks like it is purely a war now. The Kurds are going to try to just stand pat and keep the Sunnis from overrunning their positions, and the Shias are finally getting their militias out, but it's not the government. And everything on the ground has changed in the last 30 days, And so I would have to see a resolution that I would get to vote on that specifically said what we're going to do. Unfortunately, because that motion failed last week and it was offered by a Democrat, but I've tried to pay attention to the issue, not the party that introduces something. And I'm conservative, don't get me wrong, but I pay attention to those issues, and it appears to me that that we need, if we're going to do anything, we need a new resolution from Congress. 2002, most of the members in Congress today weren't even here in Congress. I wasn't. And I think it's appropriate that Congress revisit it. But they decided that I lost, and the rest of Congress decided to go forward with the same resolution. So the president has whatever power he wants to use. In regard, let me go quickly to medicinal marijuana so I can explain to folks who may not have heard this. I do support medicinal marijuana. I don't support the crazy California scheme where, just about anybody can get it. I certainly don't think that recreational marijuana ought to be used. But if we can use barbiturates and opiates and hard stuff like hydrocodone for medicinal purposes, and our doctors tell us, and I've got a long story on that I won't repeat tonight, but when doctors are telling us there are cases, legitimate medical cases where patients can be helped, I don't think lawyers like myself or other people who find themselves in Congress should be second-guessing our doctors. And all we're asking is that the doctors be given the authority in the appropriate case to use it. And while there will be some abuse, there is already abuse of much harder, much stronger drugs than the cannabinoid oils and the THC in marijuana, and I just don't understand why we don't let our doctors make that call.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway, thank you so much for your call, and tough questions, and I'm not going to tell you I have all the answers, but we're going to try to sort it out.
Well, I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you, sir. Have a good evening. All right, let's go to Troutdale and the Jesnick, if I said it right, the Jesnick household.
Yes, hello.
Hi, how are you? It's Morgan Griffith.
I'm doing fine. Thank you for taking my call.
Absolutely.
I want to just say a couple of things or ask you about a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
I was hearing the discussion about mental health, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also a dentist. But one of the things that is very distressing to me is that nobody seems to be looking at the current therapies. There's a really interesting book written by a guy named Robert Whitaker called Anatomy of an Epidemic, where he describes the pharmaceutical industry marketing these pharmacology drugs and questioning, the value of these drugs. And it's like one of the things I would like to encourage you all to do is bring in people who have no investment in outcomes. Like bring in statisticians, mathematicians, bring in people to look at raw data before you decide what therapy works and what therapy doesn't work. And another thing that would, I think, be really helpful is get the insurance companies out of this, because there really are people out there who know how to work with violent men between, 16 and, 30. But it's not the traditional therapy, that like the common belief is that these are personality disorders and you can't change personality disorders. Well, there's a guy named James Masterson who first published How to Work with People with Personality Disorders in 1984, but he never got the support from the mainstream people. There really are people out there that know how to work with people who have these very serious problems. But as long as the insurance companies are running the game, sometimes I think, what do you have to see to figure out that what we're doing is not working? How bad does it have to get? Okay, that's what I want to say about mental health. The other thing I want to talk to you about is education and student loans, where the student loan, the interest is 6.8. And one of the things that there is no federal control about the quality of the education, there are schools, just basically robbing people young kids who will spend the rest of their lives paying for degrees that are basically worthless. And when I call the U.S. Department of Education to ask about this, the only real crime is if you encourage a student to fraudulently fill out the FAFSA form, not any kind of no way to like file a complaint or any kind of investigation about quality, like professors not showing up for classes, professors who are not qualified to be teaching to begin with. There's no regulation of the schools and the faculty and the administration. It reminds me of what happened with Madoff, like those 4 men 9 years before the economy tanked told the SEC what this man was doing. Nobody from SEC investigated. They basically blew them off, and then nobody was fired. Nobody was
yes, ma'am.
prosecuted. I mean, I don't really.
Well, I will look at the criminal side of this and see if there's anything we can do. I will tell you that, and I don't know how long ago they started, but I know within the last several years that they have started saying that they're not going to do student loans, and of course student loans are now backed by the federal government or set up by the federal government, and they're not going to do student loans if you can't show at your school that if a student completes the program, there's going to be a job. Now, that's looking backwards, so they could have a 2-year program, and then if nobody gets a job, they close that program down from getting new loans. But it has made a lot of the schools much more aware that they have to be educating students to get a job, because if they don't, they lose the federal funding, which comes through the student loans. So I do know that on at least the civil side, not the criminal side, but on the civil side, they've been much more aggressive in the last 2 or 3 years than they were for the 20 years before that.
Well, that's good news.
Yes.
There's no recourse for the people who now are drowning in debt with these worthless,
I don't know.
degrees.
There has been some rumor, and I don't know if anybody's filed any, that there may be some lawyers looking at this as like a personal injury. I paid you, you broke the contract, and now I'm damaged. I don't know whether any of those have been successful. I'd have to probably get out there and use the internet to see. But I do know there was some talk of that a few years back.
Wow, that's great.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think there's any chance they'll ever lower that interest rate from 6.8 to like 4%?
I don't know about the interest rate being lowered. I do think that a lot of times what students do, too, is they get themselves in trouble, and I've been trying to figure out how to word it. But I do think that we ought to probably allow the penalties and the interest on the penalties to be bankrupted, because sometimes that gets the student into more trouble than the original loan. They're trying to find a job. They haven't found a job. The loan goes delinquent. They suddenly start getting, monthly penalties that get piled on top of the original loan. Then they get interest on top of the monthly penalties, interest on the penalty. And that creates a situation where they originally borrowed, and I'm just using this as a hypothetical. I don't have a case that I know of, but they originally borrowed $10,000 or $15,000. Now they owe $34,000. And a big chunk of it are penalties and interest on the penalties, not the original loan.
Right.
And I do think as far as penalties go, you ought to be able to bankrupt that. I don't think you ought to be able to bankrupt the underlying loan, but the penalties and the interest on the penalties, it makes sense to me. And I will try to redouble my efforts on figuring out exactly how to word that so that it becomes a valid bill, and then I'll have to convince other congressmen to vote for it. But I'll try.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Hope you have a good evening.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. We do have time for a few more calls. Those of you who are waiting in line and have been so patient, I won't be able to get to all of you. I will tell you this, however, that we will make sure that you get a chance to ask a question even if it's after our call is over. So don't hang up thinking that you won't get called on. Let's see. Let's go to the King household in Wytheville. Yes, the King household in Wytheville.
Hello?
Hi, how are you? This is Morgan Griffith. I hope you're well this evening.
Well, this is the Barnett household in Rural Retreat.
All right.
And
well,
it's interesting.
This goes to show you can't trust computers.
Well, banks can't trust them either because we constantly get calls for the kings who are not paying their loans.
Oh, well,
yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So obviously it's still a king somewhere on somebody's hard drive.
Yeah.
Anyway, a number of months ago, the EPA, with the help of the president's pen and paper, put out a fiat about water rights that they could control, and that even if it's not a flowing stream, if it's a puddle and it's on your property, they have rights over it. And late last year, earlier this year, Loudoun County tried to put that into their regulations, and it was voted down. So when the EPA first got set up years ago, they also tried to regulate small bodies of water, puddles, and their right to regulate was based on the fact that if you could float a matchstick in it, it was under the EPA's jurisdiction. And that eventually was overruled, and it seems like we're going back in time with the EPA and its massive power grabs.
Well, there's no question the EPA has power grabs. I will tell you we're having a hard time hearing your phone. I was able to get the comments and the question, but I just wanted to let you know we are having a little bit of difficulty. I don't know if there's a storm in your area, but something's interfering with the call. So if I miss a little something, it's not because I'm intentionally doing that. But yes, the EPA is overstepping its bounds, in my opinion, on a number of things. I signed on to a brief this week related to the Chesapeake Bay. This is a different issue. It's still a water issue, but it's a different issue. We're paying attention to this. Farm Bureau and farmers and property rights advocates all across the country are very concerned about what is, in fact, a huge expansion of EPA power by the EPA. Congress didn't give them any more authority, and yet they seem to think they have it. We'll continue to fight that, and I would expect some action before the end of the year by the House on that very issue. We'll see what happens in the Senate.
One more quick question. Jordan has been a friend of the United States for years, and the border crossing was compromised by ISIS several days ago. My question is, do we stand with our ally Jordan if ISIS tries to overrun it? They're a small country. They have always stood with us. They are handling a massive crisis with the people leaving the conflict in Syria.
Yeah.
And they need our help.
I don't believe that I would be in favor of putting boots on the ground, but I do believe that we ought to be able to give them some air support if they need it, and certainly any kind of weapons that they need, I would support giving to Jordan. We've not always seen eye to eye, but since the '67 war between the Arab nations, including Jordan and Israel, they've pretty much been in agreement with our policies up to this point in time, and we certainly need to make sure that we stand with our friends. That doesn't mean we put troops on the ground, but it does mean that if they need our support, we give it to them.
I'm not asking for troops on the ground. I'm asking for any kind of support as far as technical support, air support, and material support.
Yes, ma'am.
So,
I would agree with that. Absolutely.
And I thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, and I hope you have a great evening.
And we're Barnett, not King.
Barnett, not King. Got it. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, as much as I love doing this and talking issues and getting a feel for what you think is important and getting some of your ideas on how we solve America's problems, this concludes the town hall. We get an hour, and we pay a company to help us do this. So I'm cut off. They don't cut me off right at an hour, but we're already a few seconds over, so I've got to wrap it up. Everyone who is remaining in line to ask a question will have an opportunity to leave a voicemail message. So what I need you to do is when you leave your voicemail message, give us a name and a phone number so we can get back in touch with you and get you an answer to your question. So press 0 now if you'd like to leave a message, and be sure to leave your name and your phone number so that we can get in touch with you. That being said, thank you all so much for giving your time to be on the call tonight. God bless each and every one of you, and God bless these United States of America. Good night.